Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Thank you to everyone who's joined. Welcome to FBI Orchestrated Conspiracy, the story of the Newburgh Four. We're very grateful to the Criminal Justice section of the American Bar Association for sponsoring today's conversation, as well as the Civil Rights and Social Justice section at the American Bar Association for co-sponsoring. My name is Arjun Singh Sethi. I am the co-chair of the Committee on Homeland Security, Terrorism, and Treatment of Enemy Combatants. Joining me today is Patrice Payne, Senior Staff Attorney at the Criminal Justice Section. As many of you know, I am extremely excited about this panel. I consider the recent decision to be a watershed moment in the lives of the four men that we will be discussing today, in the communities that were affected, as well as the movement generally. By way of background, a federal judge last month ordered the compassionate release of Onta Williams, Laguerre Payen, and David Williams, three Hudson Valley men who were previously convicted of terrorism-related offenses in a case known as the Newburgh Four. If you've not had a chance to read the opinion, I very much encourage you to do so. Judge Colleen McMahon called the plot an FBI orchestrated conspiracy, decried the tactics used by the FBI, and expressed sympathy for the four young Black Muslim men who were ensnared, calling them, in her words, hapless, easily manipulated, and penurious petty criminals. Joining us today for this panel are Leena, Al-Arian, former executive director at the Coalition for Civil Freedoms, Steve Downs, board chair at the Coalition for Civil Freedoms, Kathy Manley, legal director at the Coalition for Civil Freedoms, and we are especially excited to welcome Kiki McWilliams today, the aunt of David Williams, to the panel. Before we start, just a little bit by way of agenda, it's going to be a conversation. I'm going to ask everyone a few questions. All of you all know each other very well, and so you should feel free to call on one another, punt to one another, ask one another to weigh in. There will be time for questions at the end. And finally, this conversation will be recorded. And with that, I'd like to go ahead and turn to the first question. And this question is for Steve and Kathy. And maybe you could just get us started by just telling us about the story of the Newburgh Four and what got us to this moment.
Kathy?
Okay, so the Newburgh Four are four men from the impoverished community of Newburgh, New York, and they had some low-level criminal history. They had converted to Islam in prison, but they weren't very religious. They weren't really practicing Muslims, I would say, maybe a little bit. And what happened was this informant, Shahed Hussein, who had been involved in our case up in Albany, which I don't know if we'll have time to mention that, but we were kind of following what was happening with him after this really unfair case that he was used in Albany, New York. What happened was the FBI sent him down to this mosque in Newburgh and told him to look for targets. Basically, they had no idea of anything that was going on there. There wasn't anything going on there that was a concern to them at all. So he was just fishing around in the mosque, kind of saying things that sounded radical or strange things. And he actually pretty much got kicked out of the mosque because people wanted nothing to do with him in there. So one day he's hanging out in the parking lot and he meets this man named James Cromedy, who was basically like a low-level con artist. And Shahed Hussein is trying to con James, and James is trying to con Shahed. And basically, we know who got conned, but Shahed is saying he's a really rich guy and he's looking for people to engage in terrorism with them, basically. And James says, "Oh yeah, I'm a terrorist," and he makes up all this stuff. absolutely not anything like a terrorist, has never done anything violent like that, has never shown any interest in that. None of them have. And yet he's trying to get this money that James is that Shahed's promising him. And so that's how it started, and that's mainly what it was, is just Shahed trying to get James to agree to do something. And then, I don't know, Steve, do you want to talk about what happened with the others? Or
Oh, what was particularly important was that Shahed pursued James and pushed him and tried to get him to sign up to this thing. And eventually James lost interest because he was seeing, I don't see a quick way to get a buck out of this. And so he wouldn't return his phone calls anymore. He just didn't pay any attention to him. And so finally, Shahed Hussein, who at some point we have to talk about him because he's an amazing character, one of the slimiest villains that you will ever see anywhere in law enforcement, simply disobeyed orders from the FBI, and in a secret recording of a phone call, which he didn't know was being recorded, but actually the FBI secretly was recording him as well as other people. He made an offer of $250,000 if Cromedy would come back into the case. Now, before, they'd only been hinting at all sorts of, jobs he could get him or vacations he could take, or maybe $5,000. This was well beyond anything that the FBI had authorized. But he went ahead and did it. $250,000. You don't want my $250,000, man, you're going to miss out. And so all of a sudden, Cromedy rethought it and said, yeah, okay, I'm back in. Now, the problem that they had was that to get a conspiracy charge, he had to conspire with somebody other than the government. And Cromedy did. And right now they didn't have anybody because Shahed Hussein was clearly part of the government. So he gave directions that Cromedy had to bring in some more people as lookouts. And this all occurred, the effort to get lookouts occurred about 2 or 3 weeks before the actual event was supposed to take place. So they were really not part of it at all. And they recruited 3 people, David Williams, Onta Williams, and Laguerre Payen. And these guys were, all 3 had come out of prison. They were struggling to get going in a Newburgh, which didn't have a lot of job opportunities, but they were doing the best they could under the circumstances. David had some serious problems in that he needed to raise money for a life-threatening operation for his brother. I think he felt under a lot of pressure to get some money quickly. And Laguerre Payen had some serious mental problems. He was struggling. But in any event, these 3 were recruited to be lookouts. And essentially what it was the government coming and saying to them, I'll tell you what, we'll give you $5,000 if you'll stand on the street corner for an hour and tell us if you see the cops coming. Now, in a really poor community with people out of jail trying to get ahead and make a start, this is really good money. This is really tempting. So they both kind of agreed to do it. And that was how the sting occurred. That's when it went.
Just to add about Laguerre Payen, he's a Haitian immigrant with very severe mental illness, schizophrenia, and a developmental disability. And he had just recently been released from immigration detention before this case. He had finally fought this long battle with his lawyer to avoid being deported to Haiti. And he had won that eventually and was released after horrendous conditions in ICE detention. And he was homeless for a while. Then I think he had some kind of room, but he had nothing, and he didn't even have food to eat. So basically what he wanted out of this was food. That was it, food. And the government created every single aspect of this plot. And these guys, none of them came up with one single part of it. They were even asked to go on the computer and look for Google Maps of the targets which the government chose. They couldn't even do that, or didn't want to. They just wanted the money. They just wanted to be considered part of it so they could get the payoff, but they wanted really nothing to do with it. And they did nothing with it.
Yeah, and in fact, they didn't have a car. I think they had to be driven everywhere.
Not even a driver's license, none of them. Yeah.
No credit card, no source of income. I mean, the idea that these people could conduct a sophisticated terror campaign is ridiculous. And of course, then the government manipulated that and said, well, you know what? Let's, as part of this great plot, shoot missiles at planes in Stewart Air Force Base. And of course, that impacted certain areas of the law that had a mandatory minimum 25-year sentence. So they were making sure that they were going to get the maximum bang for their buck out of this. They were going to get these guys at least for 25 years in jail. And then they said, oh, and by the way, you're going to want to check out some guns that we have in Connecticut. And so they drove them over to Connecticut, because without that, it would all take place in New York. It might not be federal jurisdiction. But by driving them across the state line to check out the guns, they could guarantee that they could manipulate this into a federal jurisdiction. So you see the government constantly behind this, manipulating, trying to increase the penalty, trying to increase the bang for the buck that they're going to get out of this. And I want to talk later about what that bang is. But anyway, we'll go ahead with the story right now.
And so thank you very much for providing that overview and introduction. You know, what I'm hearing is overreaching, abusive, exploitative tactics against sort of Black Muslim men who, in some cases, were low income, struggled with mental health issues, who had previously been abused and exploited by the system, some of whom needed healthcare for themselves, some of whom needed healthcare for others. And as you pointed out, in a town where opportunities were very limited. And so these men were very much exploited, manipulated, not just in a small way, but in the broadest, grandest way possible, which is why ultimately they were convicted of this extraordinarily lengthy offense. And so with that, I want to go ahead and turn to Kiki. Kiki, could you tell us a little bit about the impact of the conviction and sentence on David's family?
Oh, absolutely. I also want to be clear that I'm not speaking for Elizabeth McWilliams, which is his mother, nor am I speaking for David Williams IV, which is the my nephew who's going to be coming home. But I am using my own voice. I actually was apprehensive about speaking out because of different things, different dynamics. However, my sister Alicia McWilliams McCullum left a legacy. She left something great behind. She's the one who actually fought as hard as she did with the team that was available, for her. I thank God, for the resources that was available. I'm grateful for her fight. I'm grateful for the steps that she was able to take in order for us all to be here. Because without her fight, without all that she has done, for the family, I do believe that we would have been in different circumstances. I believe that it would have had a different view. The conviction actually put us in almost like in a standstill. It created this panic. Not only did it create the panic, for the family, but it also created panic within the community. So for myself, I was shunned in the community where I thought that there would be support. I actually was not supported, not even in my place of worship. There was a lot of not only shunning on my job, it affected whether when I started a new job, there was actually effect on the new job because people were saying that's the aunt of. So the impact, was great. It was great emotionally. It was great mentally. It put us, where we was already a family that was fragmented. It actually gave us a bigger blow, which caused us to dissipate, right? So we began to separate. We didn't come together and discuss the case. We didn't come together and talk about feelings. We didn't come together and talk about what was going on. It was almost as though everyone went into hiding, but Alicia was the one in the forefront saying, listen, I'm going to protect my family. So that's actually how it went. Alicia is the one who said, listen, I'm the one who's going to speak out. I'm the one who's going to stand and take care of this, but make sure that you guys are okay. And that's what she did. She was able to stand in front of us, really, and protecting us to ensure that we weren't impacted by what was actually taking place. In spite of her health, in spite of what was going on with her, medically, she still was there at the federal court every day. I do believe there was only one day that she didn't go when she wasn't feeling well, enough to where she couldn't make it to the actual court. But when I think of her, when I think of her memory, when I think of all that she has done, when I think of the impact and the blow, how it moved us, off of whatever we were standing on, basically. Like, it moved and it shifted our mindset. It shifted, because we're trying to figure out, how are we going to live in this community? Who is going to come knocking on our doors? I was even at the point where I'm, my name is on my mailbox. People was, coming in, and it was affecting my marriage. It was affecting my relationship. It affected my daughter. You know what I mean? And I'm just speaking about how it affected me. And I was trying to figure out how I'm supposed to be a part of something that's so big and so huge, with my little self. You know what I mean? Like, this is the government. This is the federal government. Like, what impact am I supposed to have with, being able to even just be present? And then finally, after a while, I was able to get up the courage, with Alicia's support, and start, coming forward and start just being present, without having a resounding voice, without, speaking. I just was there, present, and just being able to, see, what really was taking place. And what was taking place was, honestly, Alicia was taking the blunt of the blow. She was the one who was at the court. She was the one who was finding out what was going on. She's the one who started to organize. She's the one who, was connecting this person with that person, and, this person with this person. And, it formed this amazing team. She was speaking out at different events. She just began to do, different things that was building me, because I'm her little sister. So it was building me up as, the little sister, saying, hey, my big sister is doing this, what could I do? But she still was yet protecting us. And she did not require us to step forward. She did not require us to, to be at specific, events. She took this on, as her own, because she said, I'm going to fight for my family. And this is my nephew. Charge them for being dumb and charge them for being stupid, but don't charge them for this, right? So we spent a lot of time, and still spend a lot of time, just honestly not even really fully discussing the impact. And this is just absolute truth. We're not discussing, the impact. For me, it's saddening, right? I was watching television and it popped up, on my television, preparing for work. My daughter was at school. It popped up in the lunchroom, so it was almost like a sneak blow, like we was hit and we didn't even know we were hit. We was just shocked. The community was, at my sister's residence. And when I reached her residence, the door was it was kicked in, she was not there. Imagine how I felt when I approached her residence. She's not there. I'm hearing that, this is what's going on with FBI. I don't know where my nephew is, who is medically ill. I don't know, what's taking place. Like, how did this even happen? How did this even, come about? From what I understood, David was actually preparing to, going to school. He had, was preparing to get his life, together. A very young, intellectual, individual to me, because of course he's not only my nephew, but he's a young man that has been a part of our lives, that has walked the course, and been on the journey, but also was able to share with his younger, nieces and nephews and his brothers, like, this is the road that you need to take. He was changing the course of his life. He was doing something different, but this opportunity came for him to have this finances to help save his brother's life. He is the oldest son, you know what I mean? And to see the heart of his mother broken, she, crying, she's devastated, about this diagnosis. And now he has to, figure this out. She's trying to figure it out. He's trying to figure it out. So when I approached the residence and I seen, how how they weren't there. For me, it was, did they take did they take him? Did they take her, you're scared, you're afraid, you don't know if they're gonna, like I said previously, you don't know if they're gonna come knocking on your door. You have no idea. I'm looking for my daughter, making sure my daughter made it home from school. So you're trying to figure all of this out. I had associates tell me that they dropped out of trees off of the roof. It wasn't just a little knock on the door. They literally flooded the complex where she lived. Helicopters, waking up the neighbors, obviously in the night. And it left a scarring impact on the family throughout the community, because the community did not come out to support my family, and especially my sister.
And it was all a show. They knew there was no threat from these guys. They knew that, right? It was all just a big show. It was so evil.
In fact, they brought in helicopters, and people came down ropes on the helicopters. They brought in armored vehicles. They brought in all kinds of crazy things, and they filmed it. They filmed it so they could put it on the evening news. And that's what most of the people in the community first saw, was this huge military response to something that the FBI absolutely knew was phony. It was fake. It was a play. And they if you look at the press conferences about that, there's the FBI standing up there and lying about it, saying this was a major jihadi effort, and these were all serious terrorists, and they knew it wasn't, and they were lying. They were lying to put the community down, to screw the community, and that's what they did.
Thank you, Kiki, for being here, for sharing your story. Hearing it firsthand, it's heartbreaking. It's devastating to learn about the impact on David, Alicia, your family, and the ways in which you were alienated, and the ways in which your family was ostracized by the local community. And of course, this performative aspect, right? This description, I mean, it sounds like a terrible Hollywood movie. Only in this case, it was real life, right? This happened on US soil, and the FBI manipulated these young men, came up with all the relevant details, and basically tried to really destroy these families. And so I want to open it up to all of you in just a couple of minutes to talk a little bit about the activism that you all and the strategies that you all undertook after the sentence. But before I do that, I want to turn to you, Leena, and have you talk a little bit about sort of the broader context, right? Because this is not the only case, the only instance in which the FBI is engaged in overreaching tactics to target and profile Muslim communities in the United States. So could you provide a little bit of that context and sort of just historicize this case?
Of course, yeah. Thank you, Arjun, for inviting us. As you mentioned, this is just one of hundreds of cases, unfortunately, that CCF advocates on behalf of. What Kiki summarized in her family's experience is very much the devastation that hundreds of families have experienced even before 9/11. I mean, of course, after 9/11, but there have been families that have experienced this too. You mentioned historicize. I always like to connect the fight that we've been facing in the war on terror with many other struggles in this country. It's all interconnected. The targeting of vulnerable communities, the targeting of communists, anarchists, socialists very early on. In CCF's report on the 20th anniversary of the war on terror, we even trace it back to American chattel slavery and the way that a lot of the torture techniques and targeting of people and this whole architecture that we see in the war on terror can be historically traced back to that era. So it's important to kind of root it in that and see how it's progressed. And of course, the so-called internment, the imprisonment of Japanese Americans, the policies of COINTELPRO in the 80s, the case against the LA8, where the government fought for 20 years to deport a group of 8 Palestinian activists because they literally told the judge, we don't like their views. And it took them 20 years to fight that. In my own family's case, our experience pre 9/11, my uncle, a stateless Palestinian, was detained for several years without any charges under the use of secret evidence. It was a long battle which my father had led, another Palestinian activist with other civil liberties groups, to end this abusive practice in immigration courts. And so we've seen that historically how immigration courts have been sort of this place where it's almost lawless. You know, there's no way to confront the accusations used against you. You can be held indefinitely. And so after 9/11, you know, we used to say, you know, before 9/11, there was secret evidence. After 9/11, there was no evidence that could be used against you. And so we saw the passage of the Patriot Act and the proliferation of all of these cases, the inflated budget that the FBI has had. And Steve and Kathy traced this history beautifully and quite effectively in another report that CCF put out called Inventing Terrorists, in which they investigate about 1,200 cases or so of terrorism and national security cases since 9/11, and concluded that over 94% of these cases are based on the policy of preemptive prosecution, which is targeting people, you know, without any actual crime based on their ideology and or beliefs or faith and other tactics that they can get into more. And of course, Dick Cheney's 1% doctrine, that if there's a 1% chance that a person could be a terrorist, they're going to treat it with, you know, absolute certainty that they are. And my father's own case, you know, we're talking about Hollywood movies, that the government did the same thing. They spent millions of dollars prosecuting him. My family was wiretapped for 10 years before 9/11. We were followed around. You know, a person was hired just to simply take photos of him. And this was all based on his activism. The things that they brought into court were statements he made, speeches he gave at rallies, charitable work that he engaged in, and other political activism. They also they built this bus, you know, and somewhere in Florida in the Everglades, and exploded a bus, you know, to illustrate that this is, you know, allegedly what happened in Palestine. They tried to argue that money that my father and his co-defendants had sent for charitable purposes went to fund terrorism. Of course, after a 6 months trial, not a single guilty verdict. The government couldn't prove any of that because it wasn't true. And so what they did then was change the law so that in the case of the Holy Land Foundation 5, another really atrocious, awful case, they argued that funds were fungible. And so by Palestinian Americans raising funds for charity and humanitarian aid in Palestine, that they were able to free up funds for Hamas to allegedly conduct, you know, violent crimes. Alongside the Newburgh, there's been numerous entrapment cases, really awful cases. The Fort Dix 5 that Chris Christie had completely not engineered, but led the prosecution on for his own political expediency. Again, no conspiracy whatsoever, no plan that the men had ever conceived of on their own. 2 separate informants brought in with violent histories, trying to provoke this alleged attack. At one point, one of the co-defendants, one of the men, Sardar Tatar, even reports the informant to a sheriff who was then told by the FBI to stay out of it. And all 5 men are serving life sentences now, exhausted all legal remedies, including, I believe, Kathy can mention, but I think one of them even tried to do a compassionate release and it was denied. 3 brothers in one family serving.
Yeah, 4 have life sentences, and Sedar, the one that reported it, got, I think, 30 years.
35, I think, 35. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, it's awful. And there, you know, other cases where, you know, people have extreme vulnerabilities. In one instance, a young man was literally wearing adult diapers because he had such severe psychological problems. Many cases, I mean, we get the prisoners that we deal with, they are diagnosed schizophrenics, they have suggestibility, or, low IQ, other vulnerabilities. They're very young when they're targeted. I mean, even a recent case where the young man is 18, a former agent believed that easily the government would have started targeting him since he was 14 years old. I mean, and we see cases like that. We don't always have definitive proof, but the families tell us that they remember, this suspicious person came along when their son was 15 years old. Oftentimes it's the only son in a family of, only child, a family of working parents, who are busy, just, don't have time to supervise their kid who's being groomed, by an informant who, I always liken them to a predator, a predator who's grooming young, suggestible, vulnerable people. And so with that, I'll end here because we can go on and on about that, but we can kind of continue it in terms of the families that we work with who have experienced the devastation and what CCF has been doing to fight back.
And I want to absolutely revisit that point about what we do in light of, the legal victory. But I want to start by also thanking you for sharing your testimony, right? Because as we heard and learned today, your family has been directly impacted in so many ways. And so thank you for your work. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for providing that intersectional perspective about the history of targeting, profiling, and marginalization that we've seen throughout American history that continues to evolve, but continues to target different communities, and in some ways the same communities over and over again. Post 9/11, learning about preemptive prosecutions, and just also thinking about all of these other programs, right? Whether it's suspicious activity reporting, CVE, watch lists, all the ways in which Muslims and Arabs in the United States continue to be profiled and targeted in both very visible public ways, but also invisible ways. And so with that, I want to open it up to you all to talk a little bit about the advocacy, including the litigation that you pursued on behalf of the Newburgh Four. And so I'll turn it over to you all. Anyone want to sort of get us started by talking a little bit about sort of what that— I wanted to
pick up on one thing that Alicia said, that Kiki said about Alicia, because I just wanted to emphasize how there was a number of heroes in this story, and Alicia and Kiki both, but particularly Alicia was a great hero to us because right at the beginning, right from the outset, she articulated the problem. And she didn't articulate it quietly. She stood up there right before the courthouse and she said it. And she is gifted with a golden voice. I've heard it described as the voice of God. And when she spoke, everybody listened, and she could not be quieted. And so we used her in all sorts of events. We went all over the country with her, talking about these cases, and she made a huge difference. She saw the truth, and she was not afraid to speak it. And another guy I'd like to just quickly mention, if I could, was Shamshad Ahmad, who was the president of the mosque. And in our case that we had up in Albany, where the FBI did exactly the same thing with the same informant, and they went in and raided the mosque, brought in the dogs, brought in the whole SWAT team, and went through the whole mosque. And the next day, everybody was in hiding. And Kiki, I know what you're saying. Nobody wants to answer the door. You don't want to go to work. You're just in hiding. And Shamshad walked down, stood in front of the door of the mosque, and held a press conference. And the police came up, and the press came up, and the big crowd was there. And he said, "Look, I am the president of this mosque. I know these people. They're not terrorists. I'm responsible for anything that goes on in this mosque. And if there's any charges, you give them to me. Don't give them to them." Oh my goodness, that completely changed the dialogue. After that, we had good press in Albany. We had people that were fighting for him. There was somebody up there saying, "Give me the charges. If I'm responsible, do it. Don't give it to them." And he's a hero to me. Anyway,
Yeah,
just,
but we were unable to prevent them from being convicted, and then
Oh.
and then we saw the same informant being used against these guys in Newburgh. But one thing about Alicia, she was such an inspiration to us and to the formation of CCF and to what we do as CCF, because there was an event in, I think it was early 2010, before CCF was formed, which it was formed in late 2010. And this was around the time of the trial in the Newburgh trial. I forget if the trial had already happened or it was either before or after the trial, but things maybe after the trial, but before the sentencing. Anyway, there was this event in New York City, and Alicia spoke, and she was amazing, and she really laid it out there, and she showed us how to really speak truth to power and how to use your voice. And then there had been a few other people that were in similar situations, and there were people in the audience that were all of a sudden saying they were in a similar situation. And Alicia got everybody connected to any of these cases up on that stage, and we all put our arms around each other, and she said, we're all one family now. We're all one family now. And that is what CCF does, is we bring together the families in these cases, and so they can share that pain and figure out what to do about it. You know, so we really miss her. She passed away a year ago while this motion was pending.
yeah. And if I could just make one other hero of the movement is Al-Arian, my great mentor. He taught me everything I know about this.
He was the one that actually started CCF. Like, he called us all together. But yeah,
talk about guts. He was under house arrest in Arlington, and in his daughter's apartment, and was facing charges and so on. And he's sitting around. He has nothing to do because he can't go out of the apartment. And so he says, you know, I think I'll start a civil rights organization that'll do something about this problem. And he calls everybody down, and they come down, and he starts it. And he just keeps it going. If it's not for him, we wouldn't be here. We literally wouldn't be here. So that's another hero of the movement.
Oh, but you mentioned litigation, and honestly, well, in the beginning, we did go down and we met with the lawyers, and they had good lawyers. The Newburgh Four, they had good lawyers like Sam Braverman and some other good lawyers, very experienced, good criminal defense lawyers, and they really fought the case hard. And we met with them, and we helped them to the small extent that we could, and they really investigated Shahed Hussein a lot too, the informant. We learned more about him than we had from our own case. We had investigated him, but they did even a lot more of it. In any event, but there was no way they could win, really, because there is no entrapment defense. Like, this case is basically the definition of entrapment. If everybody knows, including the jury and the prosecution and the judge, that these guys were only interested in the money, and they were literally not predisposed towards terrorism before this informant started offering them money, right? But how does the law define predisposition in an entrapment case? They define predisposition as the response to the informants offering them money. If they agree to it and they don't hesitate, even though James did hesitate, then that's considered a ready response, and that is considered proof of predisposition, which is absolutely not predisposition. It's proof of that they want the damn money, right? So there is no entrapment defense, and this case proves that. And there was a dissent at the Second Circuit in James's case, but basically they lost because the jury was told, if they agree to this, then you got to convict them. There's no entrapment. So there's no entrapment defense. And it wasn't until years later that we could do anything legal. We spoke out about it all the time, but there was nothing we could do legally for many years.
But I want to make a point. I want you to address this, Kathy, that there was something in what the judge had said at sentencing when she, and you can elaborate, what gave us, I guess, hope in this case as opposed to others, because it really entirely falls on what kind of judge you get to pursue some kind of legal remedies.
Well, yes, eventually, I mean, and this gets to this motion, right? So if you want me to go ahead and talk about
I was setting it up for you to
sure.
Before you do that, I just want to sort of bring out one thing, and that is just the importance of centering families, centering survivors. In this case, the close work that was happening after, sort of the initial ostracization between, right, the spokesperson for the mosque, the local community, and people just sort of coming forward, and also sharing, and this point about how there are sort of this has affected the Muslim community across the country. And so this happened in Newburgh, but it happened in Albany. It's happened in so many different places. So understanding that there are these pockets of survivors across the country and how they are a source of support for one another, and how, as we look forward, and this is what we're going to get to in the end, how this victory can hopefully be of support, be of use, and be a harbinger of what's to come. And so, Kathy, go ahead and please talk about the motion and the legal victory.
Sure. Yeah, we knew the judge, like Leena was saying, this judge was sympathetic and realized the unfairness of the case all along. She called it the unterrorism case publicly, like before trial. And so we were hopeful, but we also knew that there's no entrapment defense. So then when they got convicted, there were all these post-trial motions that were really good, but they couldn't create an entrapment defense, so they did the best they could, but she denied them because she felt like she couldn't legally go there, and the circuit basically affirmed her. But in 2018, Congress passed the First Step Act, and that allowed for a compassionate release motion to be filed directly to the judge. And at first, a lot of us thought, well, it's for, medical conditions, somebody who's terminally ill, or maybe at least some really serious medical condition, because that's what it had traditionally been used for, but you couldn't traditionally file it to the judge. You had to go to BOP, and they always denied it. But the language of that statute said that you could get a sentence reduced for any extraordinary and compelling reason. And it went into effect in 2019. And there were a couple cases out of Texas where people were granted compassionate release because their family members needed them, a child needed them, or their parent needed them who was sick. And I thought, wait a minute, okay, so this is something you can use for any extraordinary and compelling reason. Wow, what about the Newburgh guys? So I started thinking about it, and about other people that CCF supports, but the Newburgh case was high on my list because I knew that the judge realized the case was unfair, unlike a lot of the judges in these cases. And so I wanted to do it, and I wrote to all four of them in January of 2020 saying that we wanted to do this motion for them, and were they interested? And 3 out of 4 were interested. James never responded. I wrote to him twice. I think now he may benefit from this because he knows about it. He's been sent the decision, and his original attorney was appointed to represent him. So hopefully he will benefit from it too. But we didn't file them in 2020 because all of a sudden the pandemic happened right after that. And so we spent a couple years, a year and a half, trying to get people out who were facing death from COVID, who were extreme risk of death based on their medical conditions and their age. And we got a few people out, and a few people died of our people, a couple of them. So then in 2021, we actually put together these motions for these 3 guys, Laguerre and Onta and David, and we filed it, and it was pending for 18 months, and I had almost given up hope. And finally, all of a sudden, there was, nothing had happened. Our reply was filed a year ago, right around the time Alicia died. I really wanted her to be there to see this, but we miss her, but hopefully she's smiling about David getting out. But it took 18 months, and then the decision came down one day on July 27th, and it is a really great decision. It really lays it out there on how unfair this sentence is. We couldn't, a compassionate release motion, you can't attack the conviction itself, even though these guys never should have been prosecuted. They weren't doing anything. They never should have been preyed on and prosecuted and had their lives destroyed. But you can't argue against the conviction in this kind of motion, but you can argue that the sentence was too long, too harsh, and the judge knew it was. She knew it was all along, and here was a chance for her to do something about it, and she did.
Yeah, she said that she felt that she was forced into giving an unjust but legal sentence. It was legal, but it was unjust.
And one of the things that you have to look at when you're deciding a compassionate release motion as a judge, you look at, is there an extraordinary and compelling reason? And then you have to look at the sentencing factors, the federal statutory sentencing factors under 3553A, and one of them is to promote respect for the law. And this Judge McMahon actually said that the government in this case had undermined respect for the law by how they created every aspect of this case and manufactured a 25-year mandatory minimum sentence. The government had undermined respect for the law, and granting this motion promoted respect for the law.
Thank you so much. And, you know, as I started, I believe this case is a watershed moment. More people need to know about it. More people need to be discussing it. One of the things that I have found surprising is how to this day, so few people know this story, but when I tell them about the story, they're very interested and they want to get involved. I want to turn the floor over to Kiki. And Kiki, could you just share a little bit about, you knew about the motion, but what it was like to hear the news? When I read it, I shook, right? And I've seen today, here we are, we're gathered online, but I can still see and feel and hear the emotion. And so what was it like for you upon, you know, hearing the news?
Well, once I heard the news, and I'm so grateful for everyone, Steve, Kathy, Leena, CCF, you know, Lynn, like there were so many people behind the scenes that did, you know, so many different things. But in hearing, you know, the motion, for me, it was almost like disbelief, because you're waiting. At least I was waiting to hear, wasn't sure. Of course, I felt sad, you know, because Alicia wasn't here. You know, it's been a year now that she has passed. And then I felt like I was holding my breath, and I'm still holding my breath, because he's not, there's emotion, but he's not physically, I can't physically touch him. You know what I mean? Like I can't physically see him as of yet. So it's, you're waiting for, I'm waiting to see him. You know what I mean? Like I'm waiting to see him. I was actually on the phone with my sister, Elizabeth, his mother, when she received the call. And that was overwhelming for me, because she literally just was outside of her home, but it was like she was about to break down, you know, and I heard her scream, and then I was like, what, you know, like what's going on? And, you know, she told me about, you know, receiving the motion. And I'm excited, but yet and still, like I said, I'm literally, my breath, like I'm holding my breath. I will be able to breathe freely when he is actually in the presence of his family. When I actually can tangibly touch him, because emotion is emotion, but feeling his physical body is something totally, totally different. So we are in anticipation, you know, that, or I'm anticipating that his return is going to be his return. He's going to be able to return, you know, to his family, and hopefully use this as a stepping stone and as a tool, to be impactful, you know, not only in his life, but in the lives of others. You know, I'm hoping that he gets, you know, involved, you know, in advocacy, you know, and be effective at what he does. I'm hoping that, you know, that his mother is actually able to speak out, and that her voice from a mother's point of view is actually able to be heard, you know, because I've watched her go through all that she has gone through. You know, I've seen her basically suffocate under the pain and the pressure of not seeing her son. And her words, she said, I don't even know if I'm going to ever see my son again. So I'm looking forward to those moments when she's actually able to, you know, have that breath and have that, you know, to be able to embrace her son. But right now, you know, hearing the motion, it's great to hear the motion, but it's even greater when your family is physically, you know, in your arms. That's something totally, totally different.
Yeah, I suppose.
Thanks.
Yeah, we should just probably mention that the judge stayed their release for 90 days in order for release arrangements to happen, which probably because Laguerre Payen has to deal with ICE detention and doesn't have a place to live. So there's a lot more that has to be done with him. And maybe that's why she did it for everybody. But anyway, it will happen. It will happen.
Kiki, can I just ask you a quick question? What do you think? You described beautifully the effect on you and the family of this decision. What effect do you think it had on the community itself? In other words, how affected was the community by the overall decision, and from where they were before?
Honestly, it's amazing how people that weren't, at least that weren't aware, right? They had this, they was affected by what was in play, affected by the news, affected by the media conversations that they was having privately, whispers that they was that was taking place. But as of now, it's something, because now people are saying, oh, the Newburgh Four, I saw it on the news, so now it's more of an awakening. We haven't seen anything, or I haven't been a part of anything, or haven't received any news about whether they're actually going to do any type of rally, or any type of advocacy that would help the community in any type of way, other than what they have already done, which is really be silent. There hasn't been any movement as of yet. There hasn't, there's still the stillness, the water hasn't been dredged, the yucky stuff hasn't come to surface. Right now Newburgh is focusing on the beautification, gentrification, beautifying, we're getting a new pool, we're getting all of these different housing, we're getting new roads, we're getting a new sewer system, all these things that wasn't in play before, is now in, play now. So Newburgh doesn't look like it looked, when the case, first began. Now it looks totally different, though there are still people here, but there are new people that are coming into the community that have no awareness about what has actually taken place prior to them actually choosing Newburgh, for their home. So Newburgh has changed. The face of Newburgh has changed. And who's in office have changed. Councilmen, mayors, people have changed. So and oftentimes people too, when they do come on board, they have their own agendas, because that's one of the things that we was experiencing, in the beginning. There was a rally in Newburgh on Broadway and Liberty, and someone had approached who was an activist, but they had their own agenda. They was trying to put out what they wanted to put out there, and Alicia put a halt to it immediately, because that was not, the plan. That was not why we were standing out in the cold with signs, looking for support. So as of now, Newburgh still looks like Newburgh to me. I haven't felt the warmth of, Newburgh. I haven't felt the embrace of Newburgh. I'm hoping that as time goes on and people are much more aware of not only what took place, but what has taken place, and the fact that David is coming home. I'm hoping that will be enlightening, to the community.
Good.
Thank you so much, Kiki, and thanks so much, Steve, for the assist. Good question. So I'm going to ask one final question, and then we will absolutely wrap up by 2:15 EST at the latest, because there are a few questions in the chat, and I want to get to those. My final question is, what comes next? I'd like to start with Leena, and again, just sort of specifically ask, how can those listening and how can others be an ally to the Newburgh Four, to other similarly situated defendants? And before you answer, and before some folks start to leave, I really also just want to lift up Coalition for Civil Freedoms and the extraordinary work that you all have done. So many people forgot about these men. So many people continue to forget about all of the people, in particular Muslims, often Palestinians, as has come up, who have been targeted by preemptive prosecutions, who continue to languish in prison because of other FBI orchestrated conspiracies, because of overreaching tactics, because of the government's decision to prey on the vulnerable, to prey on the unwell, to prey on the impoverished. And so credit to you all for the work that you are doing. credit to you all for this momentous victory. And just again, to everyone who's joined and everyone who watches this recording tomorrow, a month, 2 years from now, learn about this organization and learn about their important work and really how to support them. And so, Leena, yeah, just next steps. And
thank you so much, Arjun. I also want to give a shout out to Dr. Mel Underbaki, who's truly the definition of ally. She was an adjunct professor at the University of South Florida, where my father taught. And similarly to Kiki, my family also experienced a total abandonment and shunning by our community that was totally afraid to be involved in the case. And so she stepped up at a time where nobody else did, and continues to work with families through the Coalition for Civil Freedoms and continuing that family and prisoner support. And so that's just, one example is the work that Mel, Steve, and Kathy have done as allies and advocates themselves. As we say they're impacted families now because they've kind of adopted us all, but and certainly they feel it in their heart, the impact of all of these cases. But as you mentioned, all of these cases, they're so spread out. Hundreds of disparate cases all over the country that are sort of related, but then there are these pockets everywhere where it's hard for CCF to have like one physical location where we can really build a movement locally, which is why virtual events, COVID for us was helpful because we were able to then get a virtual audience to start paying attention. But when you're a family in California, a family in Chicago, a family in Florida, a family up in Albany, it's really hard to bring everybody together. Although we've been able to do that yearly with a conference to bring all the families together. But that's why it's been, I think, a little bit challenging for us to get the word out. I do hope that this victory, people like winners, they don't like it when you're locked away for serving a life sentence and no hope, but I'm hoping that now they see that we are starting to win a little bit in these cases. As Kathy mentioned, before the Newburgh, CCF secured the release of 3 other prisoners and convicted on terrorism charges, 2 of whom had half of their 20-year sentences left. And
can I just give a shout out to Amit Gupta, our other attorney, who won 2 of those cases and they had long sentences left. And I lost most of mine, but he won those 2. And he also represents Onta Williams in this case. So shout out to Amit.
Yeah,
perfect work.
Sure. Thank you, Kathy, for that. Yeah, but I hope that the judge's powerful decision and her words, calling the government the lead conspirator. You couldn't dream of a decision like that. As Kathy mentioned, it's very hard to kind of challenge the underlying conviction. Most judges don't want to even, they don't want you to address that as much as we want to shout about how unfair it is. Legally, it's difficult to make that argument in a compassionate release motion, but I do hope that more attorneys, would be interested in reaching out to CCF. We get so many, endless requests from prisoners wanting 2255 CR motions filed for them, and not enough people doing the work. And so any kind of legal support that, pro bono, get law firms to sponsor this, or, any lawyer who has time and ability to get involved, that's always most welcome. Events, education, as you mentioned, you're surprised that a lot of people still don't know about the Newburgh case. It was an award-winning HBO documentary that the New York Times had written about, and people still don't know about it. It didn't go viral. It wasn't Serial or one of those true crime series that get really popular. Although Alicia's fantastic in it. If you had an amazing character for television and just an amazing person all around, that's her. Writing our prisoners, pen pals, we're always trying to get people to write to them just to remember their existence, to say their names. Unfortunately, there's a lot of complicity even within the Muslim community. There's respectability politics. People don't want to acknowledge these vulnerable members of their own community. You know, it's a little bit of victim blaming, you know, that, oh, you know, they're foolish, they shouldn't have done this, or somehow like they did it to themselves. Now, of course, you can't have a perfect victim. You know, a person can make mistakes, but still completely be a victim of an injustice. And so it's important to acknowledge that and address it at its core. So we have a lot of ways for people to get involved. Say that, you know, educate yourselves on these cases. If you're an attorney or know of an attorney, we need immigration lawyers, we need criminal defense lawyers, post-conviction lawyers, all kinds of lawyers. These families are already oftentimes low-income families who lose everything. I mean, even though this is a, you know, a victory and a time to celebrate, these 3 men or 4 men are always going to walk out of there with a terrorism conviction over their heads. You know, I wish that their entire conviction could have been overturned. They're still going to have to, you know, serve some kind of probation or have some kind of restrictions. A lot of the prisoners that we support who finished their sentences have a lifetime of probation, extremely restrictive measures, and it's very difficult to challenge the length of the probation. We need people to assist with that. I mean, it's things like using the internet even to apply for work, and they can't do that. And then, you know, it's like a self-perpetuating cycle of injustice. So what am I leaving out, you guys, of how people
I know you covered a lot.
money? If you know any wealthy people,
we are donating
under-resourced.
monthly money to people who have no support for their commissary funds in prison, so they can't get anything. They have no family that's supporting them. Maybe they don't have any family in this country, so we're starting to give them small stipend every month. So yeah, we need money for that and for our other work and lots of other
for
support.
all the amazing work, the advocacy, the legal services. Steve and Kathy wrote a whole bill that we were trying to get introduced. The Ego Relief Act, the Entrapment and Governmental Overreach Relief Act. There's work that can be done with the Sentencing Commission. You know, there's the terrorism enhancement that we need to fight against and put an end to that. I mean, there's so many war on terror-related abuses that need to finally be put to an end, and we need people. We need to build a movement around this. What you were saying, Steve?
Oh, I'm sorry, just saying realistically, there are 3 ways to get people out of jail if we're focused on that. One is pardons. One is changing the law, passing bills that will create a real terrorism, an entrapment defense, and get rid of some of the other abuses that go on in court, which make these cases virtually impossible to win because they're so unfair to begin with. And then finally, there are the legal petitions that we've got to file. But all of these require a lot of money. I mean, just working with Congress is a backbreaking job. You really need a lot of people behind it. As Leena was saying, our basic problem right now is we just don't have the resources to do everything that we should be doing.
Money and manpower, yeah, or women, all people power. Sorry, Kathy, go ahead.
Just that we've had so many inquiries from prisoners, of course, since this victory, asking for a compassionate release motion. And number one, you can only do it if you have a sympathetic judge, because so much is in the discretion of the judge to, number one, find that extraordinary and compelling reason, and number two, find that under the sentencing factors it makes sense to lower the sentence. And often these are the judges that chose to sentence them to this sentence. So very often they're not sympathetic to reducing it. And so in most of the cases, it probably wouldn't work, but there's a bunch where maybe it would work. Maybe there's a different judge, or the situation has changed in some way. They've done really well in prison. They've apologized where they didn't before, just different circumstances, you know? And so, but at this point, I'm working on 2 of them. And I'm part-time with CCF. Amit is part-time with CCF. Steve's mostly retired. We have basically a waiting list of, like, what I tell people is, like, I can't really take on any new compassionate release motions myself for like a couple years. So if we had, you know, another lawyer or 2 or 3 or more that could evaluate these cases and see which ones are worth filing, that would be awesome. And as well as all the other support we need that Leena mentioned. And the compassionate release motions, since they only work if there's a sympathetic judge, they don't do anything about the Holy Land case where there's definitely not a sympathetic judge. They don't do anything about the other sting cases where there's not a sympathetic judge, where like the guy who had to wear diapers and the FBI knew this and they waited till he started seeing a psychiatrist and then swooped in and arrested him before he backed away from the plot when he started getting better. Those cases, they're probably not going to get compassionate release. And so that's why the law needs to change.
The judge was unsympathetic in that case?
Well, it wasn't a mandatory minimum sentence. He chose to give him that really long sentence. And I think it's the same judge. But I mean, again, that's something that could be evaluated. But
yeah, sometimes you don't know.
Single one of them, but right.
Yeah,
right.
in Sami Hassoun's case, it was unexpected that the judge said that had it not been for the informant prodding, that he probably wouldn't have done that. And that was
right. But that was a COVID risk case. He had a medical condition, a rare medical condition that, but anyway, the law needs to change. That's why we drafted this bill that would create an entrapment defense where predisposition is defined as predisposition, that you have to be taking a substantial step toward doing something before the informant starts manipulating you. It would also help the Holy Land case by requiring that in order to be convicted of material support to terrorism, you have to intend to support violence. Right now, these guys had no intent to support violence, the Holy Land, and several of the other cases, they didn't even support Hamas. They were supporting Sakat committees in Palestine, but it was somehow seen as support for Hamas. The jury convicted them of that, but there was no evidence of any intent to support violence. So with their charity, and so anyway, that's another part of it. But we haven't been able to get too far with that. So we would love to have, support for trying to get sponsors for it.
These are basic common sense reforms.
If I can just because we're sort of running short on time and we have a few questions, some of which we've already answered, which is great. First, just thank you all for an amazing panel, an amazing conversation. Kiki, Leena, honestly, for your testimonials. I think lots of folks learned from this conversation. And I'm really glad that we were able to end with a list of the ways in which folks can get involved. One of the questions is how can other lawyers best support this movement work and build in this moment? We now know it, right? There's clearly a need for more attorneys who are willing to work on this pro bono. And if you want to support, contact Coalition for Civil Freedoms. I am not surprised to hear that there are lots of folks who are reaching out, asking if they could have a compassionate release hearing. And I expect that there will be more requests in the future. Obviously, we've heard about this bill that would provide an entrapment defense, which if we had at the beginning, the FBI wouldn't be able to pursue these kinds of preemptive prosecutions. And of course, funding, which is an issue generally with the movement, and is an issue often, for this kind of work. In the way that Kiki described, right? In the same way that, Kiki's or David's family was initially ostracized. Sometimes so are the organizations who work on these issues. And it's important to name that. And it's important to just sort of be direct about that. And so support Coalition for Civil Freedoms, figure out a way to actually support people who are directly impacted, who just need money for stipends, right? In prison to do sort of, to sort of make their lives a little more tolerable. One of the questions, and this relates to the Holy Land Foundation, I just want to sort of name it and sort of explicitly share it. And again, hopefully we can have a brief answer. And then we'll end with Manzoor's question. And so the question is from Paul Carroll. Thank you for sharing your stories. It is heartbreaking and infuriating. I am with the Charity and Security Network, and we are supporting a compassionate release effort for Ghassan and Leishi of the Holy Land Foundation case. Can you comment on how to navigate the differences between compassionate release and the four fundamental issues of law when working to achieve a release? In other words, we want to help raise awareness about the flaws in material support laws and anti-terrorism laws, but the more persuasive narrative for the public is likely to be the human story of an elderly defendant having spent time in prison. And so really quickly, I know you've touched on this already with the Holy Land Foundation, but Kathy or Steve, can you just briefly sort of respond to Paul's question?
Well, the problem with that motion, unfortunately, is I don't think that judge is sympathetic. I mean, I really wish he would somehow have a change of heart, but there was one filed a couple of years ago for his co-defendant, and the decision showed there would be no chance for anybody else in that case, unfortunately. But to answer the more general question of how do you show the unfairness of the law and the human characteristics of the person and why they should be released and how they're suffering, you do both. I mean, you do both. That's what we did in the Newburgh motion. You can't attack the conviction itself, but you can show the unfairness of the sentence, which relates to the unfairness of the law. And you can show the person, who they are, how they've changed, how in the case of the Newburgh guys, how they've done well in prison. You know, these Holy Land guys, they were the best humanitarian people to begin with, and they've continued that in prison, and they've helped so many people. We don't have time to talk about that, but yeah, you do both.
And to me, I have to say that I think the Holy Land case is such an outrageous injustice. It's sort of beyond almost all of the others, because these people were only engaged in humanitarian work. And it's been so completely stymied in the courts that I think the only resolution that's possible may be through a pardon. And I've always hoped that we could generate enough energy to get a pardon. As we know, political situation in Washington is very difficult, but certainly that would be a campaign that I think is worth fighting for. And there's a chance of winning on that, because there's so many things going in favor of the defendants and so little in favor of the prosecution.
Thank you so much. And again, by way of legal background, right, Holder versus Humanitarian Law Project, I consider it to be one of the worst decisions in the history, I don't know, of the Supreme Court, and that's not an exaggeration, which basically found that teaching a terrorist how to negotiate peacefully is considered material support of terrorism in a 5-4 decision. I'll give Manzoor sort of the last word, his question. It's a great way to end. How can we build a stronger grassroots movement against surveillance, against Black, brown, Muslim, and working class folks? Anyone want to answer that?
Boy.
I mean, I'll start, right? I think one thing is intersectional, right? Leena, you did a wonderful job of connecting the dots, right? And so does Manzoor with his questions, right? Right now, we are seeing the ways in which Muslim and Arab communities have been impacted. And often they're also brown, and often they're also working class. And in some cases, they're also struggling with mental health issues and all of those things. And so really bringing that intersectional perspective, I think, is important. What do others think?
Yeah, absolutely. That's sort of like the baseline, right? Is seeing each other and supporting each other, and you know, not being kind of like a one-way thing, but really showing up for each other. And I think that was something that I you know, grew up, I witnessed. You know, things of course are more difficult now with distance, but locally in Florida, when my uncle was detained for years under the use of secret evidence. I mean, I take the example that Steve mentioned my dad. I mentioned my dad too, but the example of my father organizing with some social justice groups there. I mean, there's a big organization that was an umbrella group for, you know, a couple dozen churches. You know, my father joined our mosque as part of that. We were the only mosque, and you know, he wanted them to care about Muslims and Arabs who were targeted under secret evidence, and understood that, you know, we can't just ask people to care about us if we don't care about them. And so we started taking actions that affected the local community, working class people, you know, Black, brown people, on a number of issues, you know, education, healthcare, things even like in-school suspension and what that meant for children of working class parents and all of that. So that's, you know, one way to really get involved. And then they started coming, you know, the other groups started coming along and lobbying Washington to end the use of secret evidence, and showing up to the mosque, showing up at court whenever we needed them to. And these relationships continue till today. I mean, we're close with the people there. I know Steve and Kathy had their own experience in Albany, building a movement there. And that's why, I mean, they said that they effectively ran the FBI out of that community, that mosque, you know, and that's what we need to see happening in all of the mosques and all of our spaces in our neighborhoods and our halal stores and our whatever, you know, like, but unfortunately, that work isn't happening enough with local communities. And if they could briefly touch on how you guys did that in Albany as like a model.
With Shamshad, right, Steve? I mean, 90, well, not, I mean, we all helped. Shamshad really spearheaded that, I would say. But Shamshad Ahmad, the president of the mosque, I mean, he brought us together. He reached out to everybody, you know, like he had that press conference in the very beginning, but then he had, you know, was running this inner city mosque with a lot of immigrants and a lot of African Americans with very little resources. And a lot of them were actually, the FBI visited every single family that was a member of that mosque. So they were terrified, especially the immigrants. I mean, but everybody, they were terrified, but he managed to invite everybody into the mosque and say, you know, we are not hiding anything. We want you all to come in and work with us. And he reached out to the non-Muslims that were standing up for these defendants, Yasin and Muhammad. But I would say he was the #1 reason why the FBI did no more cases in Albany, New York, like this, where they did in many other communities. And and one of the main reasons why the Muslim community in Albany did not turn their backs on Yasin and Muhammad. I mean, part of that was Yasin. I mean, everybody loved Yasin and they knew that he was innocent. And Muhammad, they knew he was innocent and entrapped. So they actually embraced them, embraced their children. When they went to prison, helped raise the children. We kind of helped, we were the aunties and uncles of the children. I don't know, we just all worked together for a long time in Albany, and FBI was kind of on their back foot trying to do damage control, and they didn't do that again in Albany. But it's a different story in so many other communities.
One other thing I want to, oh, go ahead, Steve.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was just going to say that one thing I can suggest. We have families everywhere in almost every state. And so we're always trying to build, help them build a local support network. And so if anybody here wants to reach out, wants to get to know some of the impacted families and organize locally, again, it's hard because we're all so spread out. We can't be everywhere. But if people are willing to start building local pockets of strong support, we can definitely provide guidance on things that they can do. We have a lot of vision but no resources, so and not enough people, but we can help kind of point people in the right direction. Go ahead, Steve.
Yeah. No, I just want to say, I think one of the things when you talk about surveillance, the word that comes to me is a lack of transparency about it and how it is used. There is this whole thing where you go around and everybody's getting surveyed. I have during the trial, I had my phone was tapped. I know that because people were in here. The FBI was in there following my phone because that's what they do. I don't have any way of proving it. We have plenty of reason to believe it, and we've heard stories about it, but it's just hard to control because this is something within the government. One of the things that we did put in the EGO bill, along with the trying to build in an entrapment defense and also an intent to engage in terrorism, was the idea that the government should not be allowed to give classified information ex parte to the trial judge to influence the trial judge's decision. And what without giving it to the defense, without giving it to the,
which is how it is now, even security cleared defense counsel.
Right, but if they had to give it to defense counsel, they wouldn't do it. My guess is, or if they did, at least you could counteract it. The point is, this is a tool that they have to influence decisions through the judge by giving them ex parte information, which only they know about and which may be completely wrong. In fact, it may be
completely wrong in Yasin's case.
Yeah, and we believe that to be true. I think somehow we have to insist on that, because if we don't have more transparency about the way this classified information is going to be used, it is irresistible to the government. They will constantly be doing it. If we could build in some form, some way that there would be transparency for it, I think the government would rely on it less. I'm hoping, and they would use it in less destructive ways.
It was
And-
something as simple as like a name that was on a piece of paper in Iraq they thought it was him, but it wasn't his name or something. What was it?
Well,
Oh, that wasn't even the classified part. The
Oh.
classified part we think was that they thought he was somebody else who then got
Oh.
killed in 2010 because we found that in a FOIA. It's hard to prove exactly, but yeah, no,
Yeah.
but they said he was Kak Yassin in the beginning. That they said that meant terrorist commander, but it's not even, they said it was an Arabic word for commander. It's not even an Arabic word. It's the most common word in the Kurdish language, which he's Kurdish. It just means brother or mister. We traveled there last January and everybody was saying Kak Yassin, everybody that, anyway, it was just nothing.
Ridiculous. Yeah.
You know, on the surveillance front, I mean, typically when we talk about reforms, we talk about notice, consent, transparency. And so rarely do we have any of those. And of course, we live in a world where everyone is being watched, but some are being watched more than others. And we all know who's being watched more than others. I want to end by sort of turning the floor over to you, Kiki. Was there anything else that you wanted to share? Again, we are so honored that you were able to join us. You know, thank you for being here. We hope that you are reunited in real life, in person, with David soon. But last word goes to you.
Thank you. Thank you for this opportunity. I'm just hoping that as moving forward, that the finances are available, not just for what has taken place for my family, but for other families that are still, fighting their cases. I'm hoping that, the grassroots are, that people are able to use their voice, because we can have a lot of grassroots ideas. But one of the things about Alicia McWilliams McCollum is that she used her voice. She used her voice as a tool. She used her voice, honestly, as a weapon. She used her voice to counteract. She used her voice to speak out and to stand sound and to stand strong. And I have to say that everyone on this panel, as I hear, about the other cases, and I hear about the power of unity, the love that I received from Steve, Kathy, Mel was mentioned, Leena, of course, like all the love and support that I've received, me personally, I embrace it. I still hold it dear to my heart. I'm very grateful for this opportunity, to be able to speak out and give my voice. Alicia's not here, so I am the voice of Alicia. I am the voice that will speak out on her behalf as necessary, when the opportunity comes, because her voice needs to continue to resound concerning the case, but resounding, in concerns to bringing families together so that we are still yet one family.
Thank you so much to all of you, Kathy, Steve, Leena, Kiki, Patrice, for helping in all that you do. Thank you to everyone who attended today. We now know more about the Newburgh Four, and we know what we need to do to support them and others who continue to languish because of preemptive prosecutions, other FBI orchestrated conspiracies, and the ways in which, of course, the government, local, state police continue to disproportionately target our communities. So please be of support, be an ally, and again, thank you for joining and continue to spread the word. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.